Thank you, everyone. And by the way, the Chinese dinner, I feel like it's Christmas Day at one of my Jewish friends' homes. So I appreciate it. That was delicious. I was sitting at dinner and looking at the 40th Republican Jewish Coalition and thinking back of the last 40 years. I don't know that there has been a year in those 40 that the Republican Jewish Coalition was more needed than right now. There's an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We are. We are living in incredibly consequential times. Tonight I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about grief. I want to talk about victory. And I want to talk about danger. Let's start with grief. Just over 2 years ago, the world saw the horror of October 7th. What transpired in Israel in the early morning hours of October 7th will go down in history as one of the most horrific terrorist attacks mankind has ever seen. Hamas terrorists coming over the border, going home to home, systematically murdering innocent civilians, murdering the elderly, murdering women, murdering children, murdering infants, raping women and young girls. Over 1,200 Israelis murdered that morning. The worst slaughter of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. It was also one of the very worst terrorist attacks against America we have ever seen. From the Americans murdered that day to the Israelis and the Americans who were kidnapped and held hostage. As October 7th was unfolding, I reached out, I texted many friends of mine, a number of whom are in this room. And I just said, hey, how are you doing? Do you have family in harm's way? It was stunning to me that about half the friends I texted, I probably texted 30 or 40 people that day. About half of them said, yeah, my cousin is over there right now. My brother-in-law is over there right now. My college roommate is over there right now. I know there are many people in this room who that day profoundly impacted. It was a time of grief, but also 2 years later, we can reflect on the victory that came from it. Now, the scripture tells us what man means for evil, God can use for good. And as horrific as the evil was on that day, I think quite a lot of good came as a result. One aspect of good was Israel resolving to utterly and completely eradicate Hamas. That is unambiguously good, and every Hamas terrorist taken out keeps Israel safer and keeps America safer. There was another good outcome of it, which is clarity. It was an opportunity for every leader to decide, where do I stand? I do not believe this is a conflict where there is gray. It was a contest of good versus evil. It was a contest of civilization versus barbarism. And every elected official, every individual citizen can choose, on whose side do I stand? October 7th was Nazi tactics carried out for Nazi ends. The terrorists murdered the people they encountered simply because they were Jewish. That's all they needed to murder someone. I suspect we have all heard the chilling phone call of the one Hamas terrorist calling home to his parents, gleefully saying he murdered 10 Jews that day. And the father calling his wife and saying, tell your mother, praise God. It is not difficult in the face of evil like that to decide where you stand. But there was a clarity to it. If you look at the 2 years that followed, Israel did extraordinary damage to Hamas. And Hezbollah, I got to say, by the way, the pager operation, holy cow, if you wrote that as a movie script, as the next Jason Bourne movie, nobody would buy it. They'd say that's too fantastical. You're going to create a shell corporation in Hong Kong years ago. You're going to sell pagers to Hezbollah. You're going to embed tiny little explosives in it. And it remains the most targeted military and intelligence operation I think the world has ever seen. It was Hezbollah's leadership that decided who gets the pagers. And which people are whacked out enough terrorists that they want to be able to page them at a moment's notice. I did see a photograph of a Hezbollah terrorist who was riding his motorcycle with the pager in his pocket when it detonated. And on Twitter it was labeled the first bris in Lebanon in 40 years. But again, it was Hezbollah's leadership that made the decision, that guy, they wanted to be able to page. Only time in my life I've ever wanted to page a terrorist. And then 2 days later, the walkie-talkie operation, and they all start exploding. Within a week, every Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist, if a phone rings, they jumped terrified. And then you look at Iran, the 12-day war, where Israel utterly and completely defeated Iran. They took out the air defenses. They took out the senior military leaders. They took out the head of the IRGC, so the Ayatollah appointed another. The next day, they took out the next day. They appointed another. The next day, they took out the third guy. By about day 5, I'm just envisioning the Ayatollahs there, and it's like, hey, you want to be head of the IRGC? No, get Bob. He'd be great. And then the single most important national security decision the president has made was the decision to launch the bombing raid on the Iran nuclear facilities. I can tell you I was on the phone with the president every single week urging him to do that, and I will tell you there are other voices within the administration and without who were telling him not to. And it was unequivocally right to go after the head of the snake. But that leads to the third topic that I want to talk about, and really the bulk of what I want to address, which is danger. Look, as all of us know, over the last decade, we have seen anti-Semitism rising on the left. And when it started to rise on the left, the Democrat Party didn't do anything. They looked away. They figured, okay, this is not a big deal. This is a few limited people. And over the last decade, we've seen anti-Semitism on the left consume the Democrat Party. There is a real and cognizable pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party. I wish that were not true. I wish that were hyperbole. I do not believe it is, and the remainder of the Democrats are terrified of the pro-Hamas wing of their party. Look, we saw on college campuses the anti-Semitic protests and riots on college campuses. Now, some said, well, gosh, this is just happening everywhere. It's terrible. Well, that actually was not the case. It happened in blue states with blue governors. We saw it in New York. We saw it in Connecticut. We saw it in New Jersey. We saw it in Pennsylvania. We saw it in Illinois. We saw it in California. We saw it in Washington State. You didn't see it in Florida. You didn't see it in Texas. Actually, we did. We had one day at the University of Texas, and you know what happened? The police showed up and threw their butts in jail. And by the way, when that happened, they discovered that roughly half of them had no connection to the University of Texas to begin with. And you look at the Democrat politicians who were terrified to take on these protesters. If you want to be deeply disturbed, take a look at the notes Columbia University wrote down about what Chuck Schumer told them during those riots. He said, don't worry about anti-Semitism. It's only the Republicans who care about that. That was Schumer to Columbia. By the way, as you guys know, the rabbi on Columbia's campus sent an email to every Jewish student on campus saying, do not come to campus because the university cannot and will not keep you safe. At MIT, Jewish students reported they were afraid to go to school, to go to class because of fears of violence. And the president of MIT said, well, we can't discipline those students because many of them are foreign students, and if we discipline them, they'll lose their visa. Exactly. And one of the things I said in this last election, I said if Donald Trump is elected, if you are engaged in a violent protest on campus, if you are threatening the safety of Jewish students or anyone else, you will be arrested, you will be prosecuted, you will go to jail, and if you're a foreign student, you will be deported. And by the way, now everyone with a student visa who comes in and yells, I hate America, death to America, congratulations, you just volunteered for a one-way plane ticket back home. Now pause to think, why is that controversial? If you invited someone to your home for dinner and they sat down at the dinner table and said, death to your family, you'd be like, okay, thanks for coming, bye. Like, get the hell out of my house. We have no obligation to welcome people here who want to kill us. But the Democrat Party saw anti-Semitism rising on the left. They did nothing. And today, and I will tell you, there are multiple Democrat colleagues of mine in the Senate who are horrified at what's happened in their party. But they feel powerless to do anything about it and terrified to say even a word of disagreement. But unfortunately, it's not limited to the left. And everyone here knows we're seeing more and more anti-Semitism rising on the right. In the last 6 months, I've seen more anti-Semitism on the right than I have in my entire life. This is a poison, and I believe we are facing an existential crisis in our party and in our country. Several months ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu was in Washington, D.C. He was staying at Blair House. I came and spent a couple of hours with him. Bibi is a good friend. He brought cigars. There's no smoking in Blair House. Sorry, I'll tell you that. But he was a guest. What kind of host would refuse your guest? So I smoked cigars with Bibi in Blair House. His was Cuban. Mine had no label. And I burned the evidence. Charlie, you'll represent me on that, right? But in that conversation I raised with him then, I said, listen, I am very concerned, Mr. Prime Minister, by what I see as anti-Semitism rising on the right at a level that I don't recognize. And I got to say, in that conversation, it was 3-4 months ago, he dismissed it. He said, no, Ted, that's Qatar, that's Iran, that's AstroTurf, that's paid for. And my response was yes, but no. So yes, Qatar and Iran are absolutely paying for it, and China probably is too. We know they're pushing that garbage on TikTok. There are absolutely bots online that are pushing that garbage. But I also told him this is real, it is organic, there are real people. I'll tell you, if I tweet right now, good evening, within 5 minutes I will have 100 viciously anti-Semitic comments in my comments. From real people. In the last year, we've seen 3 prominent people on the right publicly muse, gosh, maybe Hitler's not all that bad. No, he is the embodiment of evil, a grotesque bigot, and if you're confused by that, you're an imbecile. And I have to say, too many people are scared to confront it. I want to ask you, how many elected Republicans do you see standing up and calling this out? How many do you see willing to take on the voices in the anti-Israel right? And I will tell you, this is spreading among young people. Young people in particular, through social media, through TikTok. And it's spreading on two different axes. Number one, ideologically, we're seeing isolationism rise. So young people are being pitched, why do we care about Israel? It's their problem. Let them deal with it. We don't care about it at all. And look, I've got to say, in the pro-Israel community, I think it's important to explain why we care about Israel. And I think many in the pro-Israel community explain it wrong. They explain it like you're doing welfare, like you're helping out some down-on-his-luck relative who needs some help. We support Israel because it is unequivocally in the national security interest of the United States to support Israel, because the enemies of Israel hate America. Because those who hate Jews hate Christians. There is a reason the Ayatollah calls Israel the little Satan and America the great Satan. And the national security benefits, you look at the Mossad. We provide roughly $3 billion a year of military assistance. If we tried to recreate that intelligence network to keep Americans safe, it would cost 10x or 100x. And every single Hamas terrorist, every single Hezbollah terrorist, every single IRGC radical that Israel takes out, the American people should say thank you. But there's also a theological argument. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at Kufi. Great friends, love of Israel. Pastor Hagee is a dear friend. And I'll tell you, my message at Kufi was the Christian church is asleep. And listen, there are a lot of pastors who are older, who are not on social media, or not following it, are thinking, gosh, things are going pretty well. And they're not seeing, we are seeing young Christians and young evangelicals turning against Israel. And they are being pitched lies, like one particular lie is something called replacement theology. And replacement theology is a twisted view that the Jews are no longer God's chosen people, that the promises in the Old Testament no longer apply, and that Christians have replaced Jews. Now, in my Bible, I believe every word of it is true, and I believe every promise that God made to the people of Israel remains a promise that is made to the chosen people. And the last I checked, Jesus was a Jew. And I will tell you, at least for me, I am very proud to be a Christian Zionist. And there are some people who are embraced at the highest level of government who have said there's no one they hate more than Christian Zionists. Well, I'll tell you what, there's no one I hate more than communists and jihadists who want to murder us. And now is a time for choosing. Now is a time for courage. If you sit there and nod adoringly while someone tells you that Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II, if you sit there and nod while someone says there's a very good argument America should have intervened on behalf of Nazi Germany in World War II, if you sit there with someone who says Adolf Hitler was very, very cool, and that their mission is to combat and defeat global Jewry, and you say nothing, then you are a coward and you are complicit in that evil. And I will tell you, more than a few of my Republican office holders are terrified of upsetting people with really big megaphones. I'll tell you this, as for me and my house, we will stand with Israel. And I am committed to calling out this garbage. I am committed to fighting this garbage. And I am committed to going to young people and saying, these are poisonous lies. And if we fail, if we wake up at a year or two or three or four, and I will say, by the way, right now we are blessed to have Donald J. Trump in the White House, and Donald J. Trump loves the Jewish people. He is not an isolationist, and he's been the most pro-Israel president this country has ever seen. When Trump is not in the White House, what then? I will say, if we wake up 5 years down the road and we've lost our party, if both parties have now embraced hatred of Israel, we will have lost our country. And so, I want to thank the men and women in this room. You are patriots. You love America, although the fact that you are Jewish means that there are idiots that will accuse you of not loving America simply because of that. But you love America, you love Israel, you love freedom. And we need to be engaged with a smile, engaged with a winsome spirit, but engaged with young people and fighting the lies. I can tell you, in the evangelical world, I am desperately trying to awaken pastors. And telling pastors, we will lose the Christian church if we don't stand up and fight this. But we need to engage in college campuses. We need to engage with the facts. And I think this is very much, each of you here is here tonight like Esther for such a time as this. I don't know a battle that is more consequential. You know, I had several conversations this evening. People said, hey, how's it going? How you doing? And I said, I jump out of bed every day. I am thrilled because we are fighting at a time where the stakes are, do we save the greatest nation in the history of the world? If that does not energize you to stand up and fight, then I don't know what will. But I know the men and women in this room will fight. And it only takes a handful of leaders. It's a handful of voices that are spreading this garbage. And it is giving every one of us a time for choosing. And as for me, I choose to stand with you. I choose to stand with Israel. And I choose to stand with America.